Translator, reverie, Kurisu. This person strode in like a divine spirit stepping down into the mortal dust, his bearing thunderous and awe-inspiring. Though he was clearly only at the spiritual pedestal tier, once his martial intent unfurled, its suppressive might was nearly on par with that of the flower blossom tier. Behind him, several beautiful female martial artists cupped their cheeks, eyes glittering like starlight, as they couldn't help but shriek, utterly bewitched. He took great steps and arrived before Zhu, the corner of his mouth hooked upward, revealing a smile that could drive one mad as he said, Zhu, remove the veil. Let me see whether you're worthy to become my bride. So handsome, so domineering. Wen Yijian, marry me, I'm willing to be your bride. Quite a few female martial artists screamed, fervor blazing. Zhu lovely face chilled. As her gaze swept past Ling Han, she said with indifference, Xuan already acknowledges Ling Han as master. As long as young Master Han agrees, Xuan will naturally remove the veil. In other words, if Ling Han did not agree, then you can get lost. What? The moment those words fell, everyone was roused into an uproar. The girls were naturally indignant that Zhu had actually refused such a peerlessly handsome man, and the men's eyes reddened with envy. Acknowledges Ling Han as master? What did that mean? Had you offered both body and heart? In that instant, countless gazes filled with killing intent all locked on to Ling Han. If gazes were swords, Ling Han would surely have been hacked into minced shreds. If gazes were flames, he would certainly have been burned to ash. Ha! So you're that young Master Ling? The godlike youth's gaze settled upon Ling Han, and he revealed a disdainful smile. My name is Wen Yijian, the future world's #1 sword. The middle state has some idiot who calls himself the world's second sword. Luckily, he didn't call himself the first sword, or else I'd definitely teach him what is called the way of the sword. So handsome! Hearing those audacious words, many girls were once again utterly smitten. Ling Han smiled faintly and said, Yao Huiyu indeed has the qualification to be called the world's second sword in the future. But as for you, all I see is lowliness, and whether you can become the world's lowliest will depend on how hard you strive. Wen Yijian's expression instantly darkened. He said, You dare humiliate me? Humiliate you? I don't think so. I've merely spoken the truth as it is. Ling Han shrugged his shoulders. Wen Yijian threw back his head and roared with laughter, then said, In this world no one can humiliate me. Oh? You really think you're something? Ling Han said with disdain. He originally had no interest in paying attention to such a person whose confidence exploded to the heavens, but Wen Yijian insisted on courting trouble. Apologize to me. If I'm satisfied, I'll only cripple one of your arms, Wen Yijian said loftily. Ling Han gave an O and said, Judging by your tone, you don't seem to be from the North region? No kidding. How could the North region possibly produce a genius like me? I am the East region's #1 genius in the way of the sword, Wen Yijian said without the slightest trace of modesty. As his gaze swept around, seeing many men reveal furious expressions, he couldn't help but sneer. What, not convinced? Then come on, I'll beat you until you're convinced, starting with you. As he spoke those last words, he once more fixed his stare on Ling Han. You don't even have the skill to fight Master Ling. A white-robed figure flashed in like lightning. It was Shen Zhongcheng. I'll defeat you. White-robed Sword King. 8th place on the Prodigy roll. White-robed Sword King, smash that asshole from the East region. Many men began shouting because Wen Yijian's arrogance had already stirred the public's anger. Of course, another person had also become the public enemy, and that clearly referred to Ling Han. However, quite a few people had already heard that Ling Han had become a heaven-grade alchemist, and at least on the surface, who would dare pick a fight with one? When Yijian was somewhat startled, he looked at Ling Han and said, You're also some kind of master? Don't get frightened if I tell you. Ling Han smiled slightly. What master could frighten me? Wen Yijian said with disdain. At most, you're a high-level Earth-grade alchemist. For your age, that's already quite astonishing. Ha! The entire place instantly erupted in laughter. Wen Yijian was bewildered by the laughter and said darkly, Were my words that funny? Idiot. Young Master Ling is a heaven-grade alchemist, Zhu Wuju shouted. Ha! This time, Wen Yijian burst into laughter, laughing so hard he was almost in tears. Wasn't this hilarious? Who didn't know there were only two heaven-grade alchemists across the vast lands? Those two had studied alchemy diligently for countless years, so how could the immature youngster before him possibly also be one? Yet after laughing for quite a while, he realized no one joined in, and everyone was looking at him as though he were a fool, except for a few beauties whose gazes still burned with fanaticism. Master Ling is indeed a heaven-grade alchemist, revered by the entire world. An old man spoke up. He was a flower blossom tier elite of the utmost imperial sect, specially escorting the sect's disciples into the mystery realm. A flower blossom tier elite of the Great Sorrow sect also said, "That's right, Master Ling is the North region's most honored genius, unparalleled. Respects to Master Ling." The flower blossom tier warriors present paid obeisance to Ling Han one after another. Alchemy and martial arts were not the same domain, yet they were linked in countless ways. If not for Ling Han's low cultivation, these flower blossom tier warriors would have had to kneel to pay their respects. Ling Han merely raised a hand, calm and composed. He had seen such occasions many times in his previous life, so naturally he would not be flustered. Wen Yijian was finally utterly shocked. One flower blossom tier warrior could be muddle-headed, but it was absolutely impossible that several hundred flower blossom tier martial artists had all suffered strokes. Hiss! The youngster before him was truly a heaven-grade alchemist? Holy sh! That was far too young. Alchemists possessed status beyond the norm. Even if you had no need to ask anything of one, you absolutely could not offend them. Because once you offended an alchemist, especially a high-tier alchemist, countless people would voluntarily step forward to back the alchemist without the latter even needing to ask. If word spread that he, Wen Yijian, had been so frivolous toward a heaven-grade alchemist, would there still be a place for him in the entire world? Wen Yijian was proud, but not stupid, so he immediately lowered his arrogant head and said, "This lowly one failed to recognize Master Ling. I beg Master Ling's pardon." Ling Han smiled faintly and said, "I'm actually not some heaven-grade alchemist, just a small martial artist. Weren't you going to teach me a lesson? Come, 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 let's fight to our heart's content." Like hell, you think I'm stupid. No way would Wen Yijian believe that several hundred flower blossom tier warriors would cooperate in acting with a mere spiritual pedestal tier like Ling Han. Was that even possible? He gave a dry laugh and said, "Master Ling sure knows how to joke." He was also an extremely slick person, not stumped in the slightest by Ling Han's words. "Wen Yijian, come fight." Shen Zhongcheng, however, brimmed with fighting spirit. He too used the sword, and upon seeing a sword expert, he couldn't help but want to spar. Wen Yijian had just kicked an iron plate and was extremely embarrassed, so naturally he wanted to regain face. He snorted at once and said, "Since you're so desperate to be defeated, I'll fulfill your wish." Translator, Reverie, editor, Kurisu Shen Zhongcheng no longer wasted a single word, and in the next breath he had already driven his sword straight forth. Hong, the blade surged toward Wen Yijian as though what he hurled was not a sword at all, but an entire mountain of swords, so heavy it crushed the gaze and weighed on the heart. If this sword struck true, one would surely be smashed into pieces. This was the white-robed Sword King's martial intent, a path of the sword that belonged to him alone. Ling Han nodded inwardly. This younger generation had already stepped onto roads that were their own. No wonder it was said that those upon the prodigy roll would definitely become flower blossom tier warriors. Every single one of them was extraordinary. Wen Yijian's expression, however, brimmed with disdain. He merely lifted a finger, unconcerned, as a fierce sword intent circulated, and a flash of sword light flickered. Hong, behind him, two wings of radiance fluttered gently, making him seem like a god descending to earth. Peng! With that single finger, Shen Zhongcheng was blasted away at once, his long sword nearly slipping from his grasp, yet he forcibly held it as blood sprayed from his perlicue, the skin even rupturing, a sight tragically grievous. Everyone was stunned beyond measure. That was Shen Zhongcheng, the white-robed Sword King, ranked 29th on last year's prodigy roll and within this year's top 10, enough to stand for the fiercest battle prowess among the North region's younger generation. Yet he was defeated in a single strike and by nothing more than a finger. Hiss! The gap was far too great. Everyone knew that among the four regions, the Middle States' martial Dao stood highest, and the North region was the lowest of the four, lacking even deity transformation tier elites. But could the younger generation also differ to such a degree? Wen Yijian was clearly also in the spiritual pedestal tier, and even if he were at the ninth layer of the spiritual pedestal tier, the difference shouldn't be this outrageous, should it? You're no good. Wen Yijian shook his head and said, if you cultivate diligently until the ninth layer of the spiritual pedestal tier, becoming the same as me, then you would be barely qualified for me to use my sword. However, I'm truly a bit disappointed that this is your so-called genius on the prodigy roll and ranked number 8. F. Mocking crowd again. Hey, Brother Wen, then let me battle you. Yang Junhao strode out, battle intent burning within his gaze. Wen Yijian swept him with a single glance and said, you have some strength, and are about the same age and cultivation as me, which means you're satisfactorily gifted. However, with the same martial arts tier, that only represents that our power is close, but power is only a part of battle prowess. You mean, although our tiers are the same, your battle prowess is far above mine? Yang Haojun said indifferently, yet in his tone there was an obvious fury. That's only natural. Wen Yijian replied as if stating plain truth. I sure want to see for myself. Yang Junhao laughed instead of raging. He shook his hand and drew forth his long sword. It was a spirit tool, entirely crimson red, covered all over with vein-like lines. I'll let you have 3 moves and defeat you in 1, Wen Yijian declared loftily, his gaze sweeping across the crowd around them. Yang Junhao sneered and said, no more superfluous words, simply pouring his power into the long sword and beginning to rouse his spirit tool. Weng, 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 upon the blade, the vein-like lines lit one after another as unending raging flames surged out, instantly raising the surrounding temperature by a great deal. Yet the raging flames rolled before him, forming a casing that protected him within, as if a shield. A spirit tool that was both offensive and defensive. Fiery sea and raging tides, sword of violent winds that breaks through void. Yang Junhao shouted loudly, leaping out and bringing a sea of flames with mighty momentum. Wen Yijian shifted his feet, evading with swift ease. Shua, shua, shua. Yang Junhao struck again and again while Wen Yijian continued to dodge. It was as though Yang Junhao had seized the upper hand. As expected of the first on the prodigy roll, this strength is too powerful. Defeat this arrogant disciple of the East region, and let him know that we North region aren't to be provoked. Praise rose in waves, while the girls who were crazed about Wen Yijian were so nervous they clasped their hands tight before their chests, praying for Wen Yijian. 3 moves have passed, Wen Yijian said indifferently. He gave his right hand a slight shake, and a sword appeared. With utter simplicity, he thrust at Yang Junhao. This single thrust tore through Yang Junhao's dense offensive flurry, cleaving the sea of fire apart and pierced straight into the fire shield. Pa, the shield trembled once and shattered as the blade continued to drive forward with barely any pause, and with a poo, Yang Junhao's right shoulder was pierced through. Wen Yijian drew back his sword and said indifferently, merely so, truly disappoints me. Wen Yijian, Wen Yijian, Wen Yijian. The girls who had been anxious a moment ago now shrieked wildly, excitement beyond words. The men's morale sank low and disbelief flooded them even more. If even someone as strong as Yang Junhao was defeated in 1 move, then even if Hu Nu or Ling Han entered the field, what could possibly be changed? In their last fight, when Hu Nu battled Yang Junhao, it had been a close contest as well. Though Hu Nu hadn't used her terrifying teeth, it still proved Yang Junhao's exceptional strength. Wen Yijian was too strong, so strong it made people despair. Jushuan after exploring the mystery realm, how about returning to East region with me? Wen Yijian asked Jushuan Hiss. This fellow actually dared to dig Masterling's people? Everyone was shocked. Seeing Wen Yijian yield at first, they had thought he feared Ling Han, but now he openly invited Jushuan He didn't care about Ling Han at all. Clearly, this man certainly didn't wish to come into direct conflict with a heaven-grade alchemist, but he wasn't the least bit afraid of one. He certainly couldn't resist a heaven-grade alchemist head-on, but there was no need to deliberately endure and accommodate him. Clearly, he didn't need Ling Han to refine pills. Austerity followed desirelessness. This man was truly hard to see through. and quite cunning. Earlier, he admitted he didn't dare exchange blows with Ling Han, and now if Ling Han exploded in anger at him, wouldn't that stain Ling Han's image as a heaven-grade alchemist? If word spread, everyone would say that a dignified heaven-grade alchemist had no tolerance for others, and bullied a spiritual pedestal tier while relying on his position. Ling Han's gaze turned cold. He disliked being toyed with in another's palm. Niu will beat the heck out of him. Hu Niu sprang out and blocked Ling Han, walking toward Wen Yijian with her hands clasped behind her back, and said, "Ugly monster, Niu will fight you. If you lose, take this woman away." She turned around and pointed at Zhu Xuan-er. Everyone was dumbfounded. Why did losing mean taking away Zhu Xuan-er? If so, then they too wanted to lose, wishing they had stepped onto the field earlier. Wen Yijian laughed loudly, produced a stick of sugar-coated haw, handed it to Hu Niu, and said, "Little girl, take it and eat it on the side." Hu Niu started drooling and snorted. "You think food can tempt Niu? Then why are you drooling?" Wen Yijian laughed and said, "This little girl is quite interesting. Whose kid is it?" Everyone looked at him with sympathy. This little girl's bite held the battle prowess of 20 stars. Flower blossom tier. Why don't you try? Shoo! Hu Niu leapt out, firing a punch at Wen Yijian. What? Ling Han was slightly shocked. Hu Niu broke through and was at the spiritual pedestal tier.